My wife introduced me to her parents as her roommate on our wedding anniversary. The waiter was still pouring tea when she said it. Rochelle didn't blink, didn't stutter, didn't glance at me for confirmation. Just a calm smile, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and a soft, "He's just someone I share rent with." As if the past 4 years were a shared lease agreement and not a marriage built on my devotion. Her father barely looked at me. Her mother nodded, polite but distant, the kind of nod you give to a cab driver or a store clerk. I waited. Maybe she was joking. Maybe she'd laugh and say something sarcastic like she often did in private. But nothing came. Just silence and steaming tea. I forced a chuckle, the kind people make when they're the only ones who don't know the joke is on them. "Roommate?" I asked softly. She didn't answer. Rochelle had always been calm. Too calm. Even when we first got married, at a quiet courthouse with no witnesses, no ring exchange, no photos, she was the one who reminded me, "Don't tell my parents yet. They'll never understand." I agreed because I loved her. I stayed quiet because I believed that one day she'd be ready. That one day, I'd finally be part of her world, not just orbiting it. But that dinner proved otherwise. That night, I stared at the suit hanging by the bed. The same one I wore when we signed our marriage certificate. Rochelle hadn't even come home. She said she was staying at Doris's place for a few days. She didn't explain, didn't feel the need to. I walked past the bathroom where my toothbrush sat next to hers, past the fridge where I had stuck a note 2 years ago. "Don't forget, you're meeting at 9 a.m. I love you." It was still there, faded but untouched. I should have left that night, should have packed my things and vanished. But I didn't, because part of me still waited for her to call me what I was, her husband. Salvador wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention when he walked into a room. He didn't wear expensive watches or raise his voice to prove his presence. He didn't flaunt degrees or titles, though he had both. What made people remember him, when they finally did, was how quietly dependable he was. The type to hold the elevator for someone sprinting down the hallway, to cover for colleagues who missed deadlines, to bring coffee for the cleaning lady who worked nights. People liked him, but they rarely saw him. Rochelle did, or at least, that's what Salvador used to believe. They met 7 years ago at a corporate networking event neither of them wanted to attend. Salvador had shown up in a charcoal suit 2 sizes too modest for the crowd, sipping water instead of champagne, and standing awkwardly beside the hors d'oeuvres table, too polite to leave early. Rochelle had walked in like she owned the place, sharp. Black dress, red lips, heels that announced every step. She wasn't loud, she didn't need to be. Her presence filled silence like perfume fills a room. Their first conversation lasted 3 minutes. He offered her a drink. She declined. He complimented her bracelet. She said it was fake. He laughed. She didn't. But for some reason, she didn't walk away. By the end of the night, she had given him her number, not out of flirtation, but curiosity. "You don't look like you belong here," she said, almost amused. And I don't mean that as an insult. That made Salvador smile, because she wasn't wrong. For the next few months, they talked, not constantly, not obsessively, but steadily. Salvador wasn't like the men Rochelle usually dated. He didn't have a luxury car, didn't text her hourly, didn't try to impress her with stories about club tables or ski trips. He listened. He remembered things. He once sent her a link to a recipe she mentioned in passing. Another time, he mailed her a paperback book with a single highlighted line, something she'd quoted to him weeks earlier. He moved slowly but purposefully. And Rochelle, used to being pursued, didn't notice she was the one doing the chasing. Now, when she kissed him for the first time, she was the one who leaned in. Their relationship wasn't loud or dramatic. It was built in quiet increments, weekend walks, cooking pasta at midnight, arguing over which color throw pillows matched the living room better. When Rochelle lost her job, Salvador paid the bills without question. When Salvador's mother fell ill, Rochelle stayed by his side at the hospital, reading test results aloud when he couldn't process them. They married in secret. No wedding dress, no guests. Just a cold government office and trembling signatures. Rochelle said it was temporary, that her parents wouldn't understand, that she needed time. Salvador agreed. He always agreed. For 4 years, Salvador wore the role of the invisible husband well. In public, he played her friend, her colleague, her tenant. In private, he brought her tea when her migraines flared, massaged her feet when she was stressed, whispered dreams of a shared future into her hair while she slept. He never pressured her to introduce him. He never once asked, "When will I matter enough?" Until the night she erased him without flinching. That dinner wasn't the first time Salvador had swallowed disappointment, but it was the first time it left a permanent taste. Her parents had finally invited her to dinner after years of being too busy and still upset over choices Rochelle made. She had begged him to come, to play the part of a supportive coworker, nothing more. He had hesitated. Just for a second. And she had looked at him like that hesitation insulted her. "I just need you to be there for me, Sal. That's all." So he agreed, again. He dressed carefully that night. Navy blazer, clean white shirt, shoes polished till the leather gleamed. He even combed his hair the way she liked. On the drive there, he rehearsed lines in his head, polite nods, short laughs, just enough presence to be memorable, not enough to be questioned. But the moment they stepped into the dining room and Rochelle said, "He's just someone I share rent with," everything in Salvador's chest slowed, and then it cracked. It was the way her voice didn't waver. The way she poured tea into her mother's cup afterward, like she hadn't just removed a man from her life mid-sentence. Like his love had always been optional. That night, Salvador went home alone. The room they shared looked exactly the same, but it didn't feel like his anymore. The framed photo by the bedside, Rochelle at the beach, her hair caught in the wind, looked back at him like a stranger. He sat on the edge of the bed for hours, waiting for something to pull him back in. A text, a call, even a lie. But Rochelle didn't reach out. Instead, Doris did. It started with a knock. She arrived with a small bag and said she was just there to collect some of Rochelle's clothes. But when she saw Salvador, something in her eyes shifted. She didn't ask questions, just stood silently in the doorway looking at a man who had been erased from his own life. Before she left, she turned and said, "You're a better man than most. Rochelle doesn't see it. But I do." Salvador didn't reply. He was too used to being silent. But Doris wasn't finished. She came again the next day, this time with soup. "You look like someone who hasn't eaten properly in days," she said casually. He hadn't. She didn't push conversation. She didn't try to console. She just sat across from him, eating from the same container, saying nothing as the rain tapped against the windows like a quiet witness. And for the first time in weeks, Salvador didn't feel invisible. Rochelle returned, home 3 days later, her heels clicking sharply on the floor as if nothing had happened. She didn't knock. She never had to. It was still her key, still her name on the lease. But when she walked into the apartment, something had shifted. Though she couldn't place what it was. Salvador was in the kitchen, quiet as always, stirring soup on the stove. There was no anger in his expression, not even disappointment. Just a calm that unsettled her. She set her purse down. "You didn't answer any of my texts." "I didn't see the point," he replied. Without turning around, Rochelle crossed her arms. "It was just dinner, Sal. I had to play it safe with my parents." "Safe?" he repeated slowly. "You introduced your husband as a stranger. I'm not sure what's safe about that." She rolled her eyes. "We've talked about this. You know how my parents are. It's complicated." "You've said that for 4 years. They'd never accept you? Then why did you marry me?" The question landed between them like a crack in the floor. For the first time, Rochelle didn't have a clever deflection. She opened her mouth but didn't speak, and Salvador finally turned to face her. "I didn't marry you to be hidden, Rochelle," he said, voice steady. "I didn't give you. My time, my heart, my name, just to be erased every time your parents were in the picture. She looked at him, stunned by his calm. And Doris, she said suddenly, her voice tightening. She's been here a lot lately. Salvador blinked. She brought me food. I didn't ask her to. You could have told her to leave. She did more for me in 10 minutes than you have in months. That wasn't what he meant to say. Not like that. But it was too late. The words were already in the air, sharp as broken glass. Rochelle stepped back, her face stiffening. So now you're comparing me to her? My own blood? Salvador exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. No, I'm just tired. Rochelle, I'm tired of chasing scraps of affection. Tired of waiting to be seen. She didn't answer, didn't apologize. Instead, she walked past him and into the bedroom. A few minutes later, she emerged with her suitcase, the same one Doris had packed just days ago. You always wanted honesty, she said, standing at the doorway. Here's some. I married you because I thought you were safe. You were quiet, dependable, easy to manage. You didn't ask for much. I never expected you to grow a spine. Salvador didn't flinch. He just looked at her quietly. You want to be seen? She added, eyes gleaming. Fine. Let Doris see you. And with that, she slammed the door behind her. The echo rang. For a long time, Salvador didn't move. He stood there staring at the door, soup forgotten on the stove. It was strange. He didn't feel hurt. Not like before. There was no stab in the chest, no collapsing feeling in his ribs. There was just silence. Later that evening, Doris returned. She hadn't expected to find the door slightly ajar, or the lights dimmed, or Salvador seated at the kitchen table with a bowl of untouched soup in front of him. You okay? She asked softly. He nodded once, then shook his head. She left, he murmured. Doris sat across from him, her hands folded. Did she say anything? She said I was safe, quiet, manageable. Doris laughed under her breath, though there was no humor in it. She makes that sound like a flaw. Maybe it is. It's not, Doris said gently. It's the reason people like me can breathe around you. Salvador looked up at her, eyes tired but clear. What does that mean? She hesitated for a moment, then reached across the table and brushed her fingers against his wrist. It means you don't know what you give people, and she didn't deserve it. For the first time in days, Salvador felt warmth, not from the soup, not from the room, but from a presence that didn't ask him to perform or prove or beg, just exist. But the calm was short-lived. The next morning, Rochelle's parents showed up unannounced. Rochelle had told them everything, or at least her version of everything. That Salvador had been emotionally distant, that he had used the marriage to get close to her family, that he had now moved on to Doris. Her father didn't bother with greetings. He stepped into the apartment like he owned it and looked Salvador up and down. So this is the man my daughter gave 4 years of her life to. Salvador didn't speak. He simply gestured to the living room. I don't care what happened between you two, her father said, but dragging Doris into this? That's disgusting. She's family. She came here on her own, Salvador said evenly. I didn't ask for any of this. Her mother joined in. Rochelle might have her flaws, but at least she tried to protect our name. You? You're trying to drag it through the mud. Salvador chuckled softly. Your daughter erased me from your lives. I'm not dragging anything. I've already been erased. Her father's expression twisted in disgust. You're pathetic. Before? Salvador could answer. Doris walked in from the hallway. I think that's enough, she said firmly. Her presence silenced the room. She walked over and stood beside Salvador, not behind him, not apart, but beside, her gaze sharp and unflinching. I've watched Salvador sacrifice everything for Rochelle, Doris said. Watched him cook her meals, pay her bills, carry her guilt like it was his. And you call him pathetic? Her father sneered. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, she shot back, and I know exactly who I'd rather stand beside. She reached for Salvador's hand. He didn't pull away. Not this time. Salvador had always believed pain came in waves, that after the initial crash, the worst of it would pass. But this wasn't like that. This wasn't a wave. It was a quiet, unrelenting flood, seeping into everything, rising without warning, soaking into the corners of his life where even he hadn't thought grief could reach. He stared at the ceiling most nights now. The apartment was quieter than ever. Even the ticking of the old kitchen clock sounded accusatory, as if reminding him of how much time he had wasted trying to be enough for someone who had already decided he wasn't. And yet, in the silence, her voice still echoed. You were manageable. You were safe. I never expected you to grow a spine. Those words had buried themselves in his chest. They didn't make him angry, not anymore. They made him doubt himself. What was he really if not dependable? If not the man who stayed when others left? If being stable, calm, and devoted made him unlovable? What did that say about the kind of love Rochelle had been searching for? He didn't miss her. That was the strangest part. He missed the version of her he thought was real, the girl who had leaned into him during a movie and whispered she hated endings. The one who had kissed his forehead and called him her calm before every storm, but that girl wasn't Rochelle, and Salvador wasn't sure she ever had been. Now it was Doris who lingered. She never asked for more than he could give, never pushed him to be louder, flashier, someone else. She just sat beside him, listened, not with the intent to fix, but simply to understand. And still, Salvador hesitated, not because of Rochelle, not even because of the past, but because deep inside, he questioned whether he was capable of being someone's choice rather than their fallback. He wondered if his kindness was love, or just the only armor he had left. Doris never brought up the night her uncle, Rochelle's father, had insulted him in his own living room. She never spoke of the accusations, the cruel assumptions. But Salvador hadn't forgotten the way she stood beside him, fierce and unwavering, while the family that once claimed to love him tore him apart without blinking. Since then, something had changed between them. She brought breakfast without asking if he wanted any. She picked flowers from the street vendors and placed them in a chipped vase on his table. She talked about everything, her work, her past, even the dreams she never told anyone else. But when it came to him, she let the silence breathe. And Salvador? He let her in slowly. He found himself looking forward to her voice, the way she laughed at her own jokes, the way she looked at him, not with pity, but with curiosity. Like she was still discovering him, like she wanted to. But every time she smiled at him like that, guilt clawed at the edges of his heart. He had married Rochelle. He had promised forever. And even if that forever had been one-sided, it still haunted him. The vows may have meant nothing to her, but he had meant every word. How could he start something new when the ashes of the old still smoldered? Late one evening, Doris found him sitting in the dark, the TV on mute, eyes glassy with thought. She sat beside him without a word. After a long silence, he spoke. Do you ever feel like, no matter how much you give, it's never enough? She didn't rush to answer. Instead, she asked softly, You mean with her? He nodded. I used to think I wasn't doing enough. That maybe if I just held on longer, she'd finally see me. That maybe love was supposed to be painful. But now, I'm starting to wonder if she saw everything and just didn't care. Doris folded her hands in her lap. Some people don't know how to care, not because they're incapable, but because they're too wrapped up in themselves to notice what they're breaking. He looked at her, eyes weary. And what if the next person does the same? She turned toward him then, really turned, her voice quiet but firm. Then you still won't be the fool. Because you loved fully, and that's never something to be ashamed of. He didn't reply, but he didn't look away. Doris stood to leave, picking up her coat. At the door, she paused, her hand on the knob. "Salvador," she said, her voice gentler now. "Don't let someone else's blindness make you question your own worth. The way you love, it's rare. I see it. I hope someday you let yourself see it too." And then she left. That night, Salvador stared at the framed note stuck on the fridge, the one Rochelle had never removed, the one he had written years ago. "Don't forget your meeting at 9 a.m. I love you." He took it down, not out of anger, but because it was time. The phone call came late on a Sunday night, just as Salvador had started folding the last of the laundry Doris had helped him hang earlier that afternoon. It was Rochelle. He let it ring. Once. Twice. Then silence. A message came through seconds later. "I need to talk. It's important." He stared at the screen. His thumb hovered. He almost deleted it, but something inside him whispered caution, curiosity, closure. He stepped outside and dialed her back, keeping his voice low. She answered immediately, breathless. "Thank God, I didn't think you'd call." "What is it?" he asked. "I thought we were done." "We are," she said. "But my parents? They found out about you and Doris." His heart didn't skip. It slowed. "How?" "I don't know," Rochelle admitted. "Maybe a neighbor saw her coming and going, or maybe it was the building staff. My dad confronted me today and he's furious. He says you humiliated the family." Salvador pinched the bridge of his nose. "I didn't do anything." "That doesn't matter," she said quickly. "They've spun a story, Sal. They think you seduced Doris as revenge. They think you manipulated her to get back at me." He let out a bitter laugh. "Of course they do." "Listen to me," she said. "They're planning to have Doris transferred. They've already contacted her employer. They're pushing for her to be relocated to another city branch, permanently." His grip on the phone tightened. "She doesn't know yet," Rochelle added, quieter now. "But she will soon." Salvador stood in the middle of the apartment balcony, the cold wind brushing against his face, his other hand clenched into a fist at his side. "This is how your family handles things?" he asked. "Punish her for helping me survive what you did?" "She's still part of the family," Rochelle snapped. "They think she betrayed blood for you." He closed his eyes. "She didn't betray anyone." There was a pause on the line. "Did you ever love me?" Rochelle asked suddenly, her voice smaller now. "Even once?" "I did," he said. "I loved you quietly every single day. I waited, forgave, hoped, but you only loved me when I was invisible." He hung up before she could answer. Inside, Doris was setting down 2 mugs of tea. She looked up, reading his expression instantly. "What happened?" Salvador sat across from her slowly. "Your job, your placement. It's in danger." She blinked. "What?" He told her everything. She didn't flinch, didn't panic. But he saw the storm behind her calm. "Let them try," she whispered. But Salvador shook his head. "You shouldn't have to fight because of me." "I'm not fighting because of you," she said. "I'm fighting with you." Then she reached for his hand, and he didn't let go. The Wang estate had always been impressive. Marble floors that echoed under every step, art pieces carefully placed to scream wealth without looking like they were trying too hard, and silence that made every outsider feel like they didn't belong. Salvador had been here once before, as a guest. He hadn't spoken much, hadn't dared to leave Rochelle's side, hadn't looked anyone in the eye. But now he returned on his own. This time, with Doris beside him. The moment they entered, Rochelle's father stood from his place on the living room sofa. His expression was sharp, hands folded tightly in front of him as though containing fury just beneath the surface. Rochelle's mother didn't rise. She simply glanced at Doris, her eyes narrowing as if judging every inch of her own niece. "I thought we made it clear," her father said coldly. "You're no longer welcome here, Salvador." Doris stepped forward. "He's not here alone." Her voice didn't waver. The room froze. You, her father said, his tone shifting from cold to cutting. You're the real disappointment. I could say the same, Doris replied. Her words hit the room like a strike of lightning. Her uncle's eyes widened, not because of her boldness, but because of the mirror she held up with just that, one sentence. You're being manipulated, her aunt said, standing now. He's using you to get back at Rochelle. Doris turned her eyes to her. Is that what you told yourself? When he spent 4 years being invisible? When Rochelle called her husband a roommate in front of you and you said nothing? She was protecting us, her mother snapped. She was protecting herself, Doris said, louder now, from admitting she never valued him, from owning the truth that she married a good man and crushed him under the weight of her expectations. Enough, Rochelle's father shouted. You've been poisoned. We're sending in the transfer request today. You're leaving for the overseas branch next week. Salvador spoke for the first time. She won't go. The room turned to him. Even Doris looked slightly startled by the calmness in his voice. He stepped forward, eyes on Rochelle's father. You think I'm weak because I didn't speak up, because I let things slide, because I chose peace over confrontation. But that wasn't weakness. It was love. Real love doesn't scream to be seen. It waits. It sacrifices. He looked around the room, the place where he had once dreamed. Of being accepted, being embraced as family, I waited for years. For Rochelle to see me. For all of you to recognize that I gave everything I had. And in return, I was erased. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He looked at them one by one. I'm not asking to be part of this family anymore. I'm asking you to stop punishing the only person who saw my worth when none of you did. She's our blood, her mother said stiffly. So am I, Doris said. But you never treated me like it. Rochelle entered the room at that moment. She had heard the shouting from upstairs. Her hair was slightly messy, her robe loose, around her frame. She looked tired in a way that went beyond sleep. Her eyes scanned the room, landing last on Salvador. You came. He looked at her. I didn't come back, he said. I came to say goodbye, the right way. Doris turned to him confused, but he kept his eyes on Rochelle. You wanted me to disappear. So I will, but not broken, not erased, not yours. Rochelle opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Salvador looked at her parents. She made her choice the night she pretended I didn't exist, and I'm making mine now. Then he turned to Doris. Gently, slowly. You don't deserve to be caught in this. I'm not caught in anything, she said. I chose this. He reached for her hand again. She didn't hesitate, but the tension wasn't over. Rochelle stepped forward, her voice cracking. So that's it? You throw away everything? The years, the vows, us, for her? Salvador turned to her. His voice wasn't angry. It was heartbreakingly soft. There was never an us, Rochelle. Not really. There was me, loving you, and you, waiting for someone better. She looked stunned. For once, her sharp tongue offered no defense. And then Doris spoke. You had him, and you didn't even have to try. But you treated him like a placeholder. I won't apologize for loving what you discarded. Silence wrapped the room in thick tension. Rochelle's mother stepped forward. Leave, both of you. Gladly, Doris said, but as they turned, Rochelle spoke one more time. You'll regret this. Salvador paused. He looked over his shoulder, not with bitterness, but with clarity. No, I only regret staying this long. They walked out of the Wang estate hand in hand, the cold air biting against their skin. In the parking lot, Doris exhaled deeply. That was more than I expected. Salvador looked at her. You were incredible. I've never gone against them like that, she admitted. But I couldn't stand still while they tried to rewrite your story. He smiled faintly, still processing it all. I think I've spent so long not being chosen, I forgot what it feels like. She stopped walking. Well, I choose you. His heart thudded. Simple, quiet, no theatrics, just truth. He didn't reply. Instead, he leaned in, resting his forehead against hers, and in that quiet space, without words, they rewrote everything. The news of Doris rejecting the overseas transfer spread like wildfire through the Wang family. Her quiet refusal came with a signed letter of resignation and a calm smile as she handed it over to the regional director her uncle had called in for damage control. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just walked away. What none of them expected was what happened next. Doris joined Salvador's design firm, the same one he had been building quietly on the side, brick by brick, sketch by sketch, something he had poured himself into while Rochelle was busy pretending he didn't exist, a company no one in her family had cared to learn about. Now, with Doris by his side, brilliant, precise, emotionally aware, it bloomed into something far greater. Within months, their collaboration went viral. A fashion show in Milan showcased Salvador's line, Revival. The collection told a story of betrayal, of erasure, of being seen again. Each design carried symbolic weight. The final piece, a sheer ivory coat embroidered with red thread running through jagged seams, left audiences in tears. People didn't just buy the clothes. They connected with the pain. Salvador never mentioned Rochelle, not publicly. He didn't need to. But the world began asking, who was the woman that inspired such haunting beauty? And the Wang family, who once dismissed him, now watched their name become synonymous with shame in elite circles. Not because Salvador sought revenge through words, but because his silence spoke louder than any accusation ever could. Rochelle saw the entire fashion show live stream from a laptop in her bedroom. She didn't leave the house much anymore. Her friends had begun to drift away, whispers of how she had lost a good one, trailing behind her in every social setting. She kept her blinds closed during the day. The only light she let in came from the screen. Salvador was radiant on stage. Not in a flashy way, but in a way that showed he had finally become everything she feared he could be, without her. Her fingers hovered over her phone more times than she could count. She never pressed call. She just scrolled through old photos, like a ghost clinging to a life she'd buried herself. Meanwhile, Salvador's life surged forward. Doris became not just his partner in work, but his partner in life. Slowly, naturally, without the need to perform. She never pushed, never demanded a title, never tried to fit into someone else's mold. Instead, she gave him space to rebuild. And when he was ready, he didn't need a grand gesture. One quiet morning, over toast and orange juice, he looked up at her and said, "I'm in love with you." She blinked, then smiled. I know. It wasn't a proposal, but it was everything. A few weeks later, an anonymous package arrived at Rochelle's door. Inside was a single item, the original wedding photo of her and Salvador, ripped clean down, the center. No note, no explanation. But Rochelle understood. It was closure, and it wasn't hers to write anymore. She took the photo and placed it in the fireplace, watched it curl and blacken in the flames. But she didn't cry. Not because she was strong, but because she'd run out of tears long ago. A week after the package, a scandal broke out. Wang Enterprises was found guilty of manipulating internal employee records for personal gains, including attempts to push out family members under false pretenses. Leaked emails, confidential memos, voice recordings, painstakingly compiled and delivered to regulatory bodies by an anonymous whistleblower. No one could prove it was Salvador or Doris, but they knew. The company's stock plummeted. Contracts were canceled. The public backlash was merciless. Wang Enterprises was forced to issue a public apology. The chairman, Rochelle's father, resigned in disgrace. In one final twist of irony, the very man who had once kicked Salvador out of a dinner table for being beneath them now watched from the sidelines as his reputation crumbled under the weight of his own decisions. Salvador never commented publicly. Not once. His silence wasn't weakness. It was justice, the kind that doesn't need applause, just results. Months passed. One golden afternoon, Salvador stood in the backyard of a cozy new home, sunlight slipping through the trees, Doris sitting. Beside him on a bench, a sketchbook in her lap. "Would you do it all over again?" she asked suddenly, not looking at him. He thought about it. Everything. The pain, the erasure, the betrayal. Then he reached over, plucked a leaf from her hair, and said, "Only if it still led me here." She looked up, smiled. That was all he needed. Behind them, a small girl with braids ran through the grass, laughing. Maria. She didn't call him Dad. She called him Sal. It was enough. He hadn't taken her from Rochelle. Maria had chosen him. Rochelle, isolated in the ruins of everything she'd once controlled, now sat alone most nights replaying conversations she never valued when they were real. Every sentence Salvador had once whispered in the quiet now haunted her loudly. "You only loved me when I was invisible." She wanted to ask him if there was still a way back, if anything could be rebuilt. But by the time she gathered the courage to show up at his doorstep, she was met with something she had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not pain. Peace. He didn't turn her away. He simply said, "You taught me what love is not. For that, I'll always be grateful." And then he closed the door. Behind it wasn't revenge. It was everything Rochelle never gave him. A future, a family, a place where he was no longer a shadow. Salvador had finally found the love he deserved, and this time, he didn't need anyone's permission to keep it.